Deep in the remote wilderness of Canada, where ancient trees stand tall and rivers carve through rugged landscapes, an unbreakable bond was about to form, one that would defy the very laws of nature. On a crisp morning, Ethan Reed, a dedicated wildlife biologist, and Mason Turner, a skilled photographer, were on a routine patrol. With binoculars and cameras in hand, they navigated the dense forest, their vehicle humming softly as it pierced the tranquil silence. But then, out of nowhere, a faint, heart-wrenching cry shattered the stillness. It wasn't the sound of a bird or a deer, but something more desperate, more haunting, the kind of sound that pulls at your very soul. Ethan froze, his heart racing. Mason looked at him, his expression a mix of confusion and unease. "Did you hear that?" Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible. The cry echoed again, faint but persistent, like a plea for help from deep within the forest's embrace. Without hesitation, Ethan stopped the vehicle, grabbed his binoculars, and scanned the dense underbrush. His brow furrowed as he exchanged a determined glance with Mason. Whatever it was, it needed them, and they couldn't turn away. Ethan and Mason made their way cautiously toward the cries, their boots crunching against fallen leaves and twigs. The sound grew louder as they ventured deeper into the woods, echoing with a heart-wrenching vulnerability that made Ethan's chest tighten. Mason, ever cautious, scanned their surroundings, his camera slung over his shoulder like a shield. Then they saw it. Nestled in a small clearing, partially obscured by the thick ferns, was a lynx cub. Its silvery white fur shimmered faintly in the dappled sunlight, a stark contrast to the surrounding greenery. The little creature was trembling, its ribs visible beneath its thin fur. But what stopped Ethan in his tracks were the two lifeless forms lying nearby, two other cubs, their tiny bodies still and cold. Ethan knelt down, his heart heavy. "The mother must be gone," he murmured, his voice cracking with sorrow. "Poachers." The word hung unspoken between them, but was felt like a shadow over the scene. Mason hesitated, glancing around nervously. "Ethan, if the mother is still alive." "She's not," Ethan interrupted softly, his gaze locked on the frail cub. Its wide, fearful eyes met his, pleading for help. Despite its fear, it didn't flinch as Ethan slowly extended his hand, speaking in a calm, soothing tone. The cub let out a faint cry, too weak to resist or run. Ethan gently scooped up the cub, feeling its fragile body quiver against him. He glanced back at Mason, who nodded reluctantly, silently agreeing with what they both knew. They couldn't leave it here. "We'll call her Luna," Ethan said, his voice steady with quiet determination. "Her fur, it looks like moonlight." Carrying Luna carefully in his arms, they returned to the vehicle. Mason threw a protective glance back at the forest, still uneasy about their decision. Ethan's resolve, however, didn't waver. They had saved one life today, but the hard part was just beginning. Back in the truck, as the vehicle rumbled back to their cabin, Ethan glanced down at the tiny lynx nestled in the blanket. Luna's eyes began to close, her trembling slowing as she felt the warmth of safety for the first time. Yet, deep down, Ethan knew they were in a race against time to save her. Back at the cabin, Ethan and Mason quickly transformed their living space into a makeshift wildlife care center. The once cozy room now resembled a small clinic, filled with blankets, medical supplies, and a heating pad they'd rigged to keep Luna warm. Ethan gently placed the cub on the soft bedding, her tiny body barely making an imprint. She was still trembling, her breaths shallow and uneven. Mason brought over a small syringe filled with a mixture of milk replacer and vitamins. "She's severely dehydrated," Mason muttered, handing the syringe to Ethan. Ethan knelt beside Luna, his movements slow and deliberate. "Come on, Luna," he whispered, guiding the syringe to her mouth. "You've made it this far. Don't give up on me now." At first, Luna didn't respond, her body too weak. Ethan's heart sank, but he refused to give up. Dropping a small amount of the liquid onto her nose, he watched as her tongue flicked out instinctively to taste it. "There you go," Ethan encouraged softly. Slowly, Luna began to drink, her movements feeble but determined. Hours turned into days as Ethan and Mason poured their energy into nursing Luna back to health. They took turns feeding her, monitoring her temperature, and researching everything they could about lynx care. Mason, though hesitant at first, found himself growing attached. One evening, as he sat by the fire, Luna wobbled over to him on unsteady legs, her eyes wide with curiosity. Mason reached out cautiously, and to his surprise, she nuzzled against his hand. "She's a fighter," Mason admitted, a rare smile crossing his face. "She's more than that," Ethan replied, watching the interaction with pride. "She's a survivor." Despite their efforts, there were moments of doubt. One night, Luna's condition worsened, her breathing shallow and labored. Ethan stayed by her side, refusing to sleep, whispering words of encouragement into the stillness of the night. "You're not alone anymore, Luna," he said, his voice breaking. "You've got a family now. We're here for you." By morning, Luna's strength had returned, and for the first time, she managed a small, playful swat at Mason's shoelace. "She's going to make it," Mason said, a mixture of relief and amazement in his voice. Ethan nodded, a smile breaking through his exhaustion. Luna's survival wasn't just her victory, it was theirs too. In saving her, they had found a renewed sense of purpose, a reminder of why they had chosen to dedicate their lives to wildlife. But even as they celebrated her progress, Ethan couldn't shake the thought of what lay ahead. Raising a wild lynx wasn't going to be easy, and the challenges of integrating her back into her natural environment loomed large. For now, though, as Luna curled up in a warm ball at Ethan's feet, they allowed themselves a moment of hope. Weeks turned into months, and Luna's transformation was nothing short of miraculous. Her fur had grown thick and glossy, her eyes sparkled with energy, and her playful nature brought life to the once quiet cabin. Ethan and Mason, though initially unsure about raising a wild lynx, had adapted to their roles as caregivers. They created a small outdoor enclosure, replicating elements of Luna's natural habitat to encourage her instincts. Every day, Ethan spent hours teaching her how to climb, stalk, and pounce, skills she'd need to survive in the wild. "Look at her," Ethan said one afternoon, watching as Luna skillfully leaped from one branch to another in the enclosure. "She's a natural." Mason leaned against the enclosure's fence, arms crossed. "She's got potential, but are you ready for the next step?" Ethan sighed, his gaze fixed on Luna. The thought of releasing her into the wild brought a mix of pride and dread. "I know it's what's best for her," he said quietly, "but letting her go, it's going to be the hardest thing I've ever done." Mason placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You've done an incredible job, Ethan. She wouldn't be here without you, but you have to trust that she's ready, just like she trusts you." The decision weighed heavily on Ethan's heart, but he knew Mason was right. Luna wasn't meant to live her life in captivity. As much as he wanted to keep her close, her true home was in the wild, where she belonged. In preparation for her release, Ethan and Mason began taking Luna on supervised trips to a nearby forest, gradually acclimating her to the sights, sounds, and scents of the wilderness. They watched with a mix of joy and sorrow as she explored her surroundings with curiosity and confidence. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Luna curled up between them, Ethan finally voiced the question that had been gnawing at him. "Do you think she'll remember us?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mason didn't answer right away. Instead, he gazed at the flickering flames, his expression thoughtful. "She might not remember us the way we remember her," he said finally, "but the bond we've built, that'll stay with her forever, no matter where she goes." Ethan nodded, comforted by the thought. Luna had become more than just a rescue, she was family. As the day of Luna's release drew closer, the cabin was filled with a bittersweet energy. They packed a tracking collar to monitor her progress, ensuring she had the best chance of survival. The morning of the release, Ethan knelt in front of Luna, stroking her soft fur one last time. "You've got this, Luna," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Go out there and show the world what you're made of." Mason stood nearby, silently watching. He wasn't one for sentimental goodbyes, but even he felt the weight of the moment. With a final look back, Luna bounded off into the forest, her graceful movements disappearing into the trees. Ethan and Mason stood in silence, their emotions a mixture of pride and heartbreak. "She'll be okay," Mason said eventually, his tone reassuring. Ethan nodded, a tear slipping down his cheek. "Yeah, she will." As they turned to head back to the cabin, Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of fulfillment. Saving Luna hadn't just changed her life, it had changed theirs. And though the cabin felt emptier without her, the bond they'd shared would remain a part of them forever. The days after Luna's release were eerily quiet. Ethan often found himself staring at the forest's edge, hoping for a glimpse of her familiar silhouette. Mason, ever the pragmatist, kept himself busy repairing the cabin and tending to chores, though he too felt the void Luna had left behind. Ethan tracked her movements using the GPS collar, checking her progress daily. To his relief, Luna seemed to adapt quickly to her new life. The data showed her exploring vast territories, marking her presence near streams, cliffs, and open fields. "She's covering a lot of ground," Mason remarked one evening, glancing over Ethan's shoulder at the screen. "That's a good sign." Ethan nodded, though his heart ached. Luna was thriving, and that's all he had ever wanted, but the cabin felt emptier without her playful energy. Weeks passed, and the forest began to change with the seasons. The leaves turned golden, then fell away, leaving the trees bare against the winter sky. One chilly evening, as snow began to dust the ground, Ethan was startled by a soft scratching at the door. His heart leaped. Could it be? He flung the door open, and there she was, Luna, standing tall against the snow, her fur thick and luxurious. She looked more wild than ever, her piercing eyes reflecting the moonlight, yet there was something familiar in the way she tilted her head, as if to say, "I remember you." "Luna," Ethan whispered, his voice trembling with disbelief. The lynx stepped closer, nuzzling his hand briefly before pulling away. Ethan could see it in her stance. She wasn't here to stay. She was merely saying goodbye. Mason joined him at the door, a soft smile spreading across his face. "She's doing fine," he said quietly. "Better than fine." Ethan knelt, holding back tears as he stroked Luna's fur one last time. "You'll always have a home here," he said. With a final lingering look, Luna turned and bounded back into the forest, her movements swift and confident. Ethan and Mason watched until she disappeared into the shadows. "That's the last time we'll see her, isn't it?" Ethan asked, his voice thick with emotion. Mason rested a hand on his shoulder. "Maybe, but she's where she's meant to be. And thanks to you, she's ready for whatever comes her way." As the door closed behind them, Ethan realized Mason was right. Luna's visit wasn't an ending, it was a new beginning for her and for them. That night, as the snow fell gently outside, Ethan sat by the fire with a renewed sense of purpose. Saving Luna had taught him that sometimes letting go is the greatest act of love. And though she was gone, her spirit would forever roam the forest. In his heart, months turned into years and life at the cabin found a new rhythm. Ethan and Mason continued their work with wildlife, rehabilitating injured animals and helping others return to their natural habitats. Luna's story became a cornerstone of their mission, inspiring them to expand their efforts and share their experiences with the world. Ethan began documenting their journey, writing a book about Luna and their time together. The story resonated far and wide, touching the hearts of those who read it. Donations poured in, allowing Ethan and Mason to build a small wildlife sanctuary near the cabin. They named it Luna's Haven in her honor. The sanctuary became a safe space for creatures in need, from orphaned foxes to injured eagles. Children and adults alike visited to learn about wildlife conservation and the delicate balance of nature. Luna's legacy lived on in every animal they saved and every person they inspired. Every so often, Ethan would take a walk through the forest, his heart always hoping for a glimpse of her. He never saw Luna again, but he often found signs of her, a paw print in the mud, scratches on a tree, or the faint call of a lynx echoing through the trees. On quiet nights, as he sat by the fire, Ethan would smile to himself, imagining Luna prowling through the wild, strong, and free. She had taught him so much, not just about animals but about resilience, trust, and the courage to let go. And though she was no longer by his side, Luna's spirit would forever guide him, reminding him of the unbreakable bond between humans and the wild. The forest, vast and untamed, was no longer just a backdrop to Ethan's life. It was a testament to love, loss, and the enduring power of hope.